I'm Kevin Jacobsen of Gold Derby here with Melanie Lynskey, who is in two big shows this TV season, Yellowjackets and Candy. But before we get to those, I would love to know actually what this past year has been like in terms of taking in this very positive response for both these shows from fans and from the industry. You know, you won a Critics' Choice Award for Yellowjackets. You were on the cover of Variety. I saw that recently. How have you been taking all this in?
Oh my gosh. It's I it's crazy. I already felt so fortunate just to be working, making a living, doing work that I loved, being able to sort of not like pick and choose, but being able to say no to things if I wasn't passionate about them. So to have like the recognition, it's been crazy. It's not something I ever expected. The cover of Variety is like it's very surprising. It's all very new to me. Like people are having to coach me through photo shoots. I haven't done a lot of them. It's like, and the Critics' Choice Award was very, very special. It's very meaningful to me.
And you also did your first late night show, right, with Seth
Yeah.
Meyers. So yeah.
Yeah. There's a lot of firsts. It's funny to be having this many like first moments at 45 years old. It's crazy.
Well, I mean, you have two fascinating performances here. So I want to start with Yellowjackets because your character of Shauna, she's a very complicated person, to say the
Hmm.
least, because, on the surface, you could say, oh, she's a housewife, she's a mother, she's bored and kind of unhappy with her situation. Maybe we've seen a character like this before,
Mhm.
but then there's also this kind of storm going on beneath the surface, and she will just go to these extreme measures to protect herself and her family. And I'm curious, just what were the elements of Shauna that you saw just from the pilot that you found recognizable or that kind of appealed to you?
There wasn't a lot of Shauna in the pilot. I think I worked for 2 days on the pilot. Um, but I got a sense when I read it, I was like, oh, this is interesting. I think it was the moment where, she's ironing and watching the game show that's not Jeopardy, and she's like, oh, you dumb bitch. It's somebody's answer. Like, it's just a sort of like aside. And it's like, oh, she's smart. She's kind of mean. And then there was a scene with Tawny in the diner with Thaisa, where you sort of see an undercurrent of like danger and people being kind of afraid of her. And I was just like, what's this about? And then I had a Zoom with Ashley and Bart and Karen Kusama and Drew, our executive producer, and they talked me through the first season and what they thought was going to happen. And I was sold. I just was like, this is what I want to do. I'm
Mm.
so excited.
I'm also curious how much of this adult version of Shauna do you think is who she always would have been, even if the crash hadn't happened, or how much you think just from that experience she learned in the wilderness that she's now integrating into who she is now?
It's such a good question. I don't, I think she would have found ways to express the kind of reckless, dangerous parts of herself in healthier ways. If she was a young person who got to have a normal experience, going to college, like dating around, meeting people, I think she would have become a different person who was a lot freer. I think she got back from the wilderness and there's a certain amount of like wearing a costume that she decided to do, like putting on this sort of like housewife outfit. And part of it is trying to contain herself, I think, because she's kind of afraid of herself. And part of it is guilt over what happened to her best friend when they were out in the wilderness and feeling like, okay, I have another chance. I'm going to do what I think is the responsible thing to do here. And then I think part of it is just trying to assimilate.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I mean, it's interesting to have these two parallel storylines going on with the 90s and 2021. I've spoken to Tawny and Juliet and Christina over the last few
Oh,
weeks, and they've all really talked about how nice it is to have that storyline of them in the past running kind of concurrently throughout the whole season, because you're really seeing the foundation of how your characters sort of became who they are now. So I'm just wondering what your talks were with, Sophie Nalise, who plays your younger version of Shauna, and just how helpful that storyline is for you in figuring out who she is now.
the storyline is so helpful because the writers are so careful about like threading the two stories together. So there's always something thematic within your character that is happening to both at the same time. So you can learn a lot. Also, it's like written in backstory, which is incredibly helpful. And then for me, a huge part of my own character development was watching what Sophie was doing over the course of the season. And that was mostly in the table reads, because we would all do a table read on Zoom. And so I would get to just watch her performance like I was just watching on a screen, and just see like, she's embarrassed when I say this because she's like, that's not the full performance. And I'm like, I know it's a table read, but the main sort of components are there. And I got to see like she has a stillness and a toughness and a direct quality that I really like that I don't really have. I'm more sort of like fidgety, and so I tried to incorporate some of that, especially in moments when Shauna is being a bit more intimidating. I tried to sort of channel Sophie Nalise a little bit. And then also just to see the beautiful work she was doing. I just was like, oh my God, I'm so lucky. I've always thought there should be like, well, I guess there are Emmys for casting directors. I think our casting director and finding that young cast, it just did the most amazing job. They're all so good.
They're incredible. The way they channel you and you channel them, it's eerie almost.
Weird, right?
Yeah.
It's weird. Every single person is just
Mm-hmm.
getting it exactly right, but also doing something that's like very true to themselves and very honest. It never feels like they're trying to impersonate the other person.
Right. Well, with those other cast members I talked about, they also all talked about how much they all really formed this quick bond with each other, and with you, of course. I'm actually curious because, each of your characters has like these kind of defining characteristics about them. Do the four of you also have certain traits that maybe you've observed just from hanging out together just as actors? Like, is one of you more of a leader? Like, what is the dynamic?
Oh yeah. I think I would say that I'm the caretaker. I'm just trying to like, we're all protective in different ways. We're all extremely protective. I will say that. That's something that we all have in common. Like if we think one of the others is being messed with, we'll all sort of like jump to each other's defense. And we're all a little bit, we don't love new people. Like, so it was kind of a miracle that we all liked each other and we all did connect in this way. I would say though, Christina always has the information. Like if you want information, just go right to Christina. She knows everything somehow. She knows like when we're starting shooting again. She knows like who new people on the crew are. She's just like, she gets all the information before everyone else. So
Yeah, that tracks. I mean, just from talking to her, she's like very sharp, like
she's
very
very sharp.
focused. Yeah.
Yeah. And she like demands to know things.
Yeah.
So like, I'm very impressed by her.
Well, just speaking to your storyline in season one, the Adam situation is very fascinating, where she's getting into this affair with him. It doesn't exactly end on the best of terms.
No.
Yeah, so I don't know how much you knew ahead of time about where that was all going, but I'm just curious, what were you thinking about this relationship as the season was going on, in terms of like, can we trust this guy? Is he just manipulating her? Is he maybe actually harmless? Like, what was your thought process?
Well, because I'm a nightmare and I want all the answers to everything, to do with the story. I knew all of that ahead of time. So I knew that he was just like a guy who I had met and we connected. And I knew that Shauna's trauma was going to come up. And I knew that I would end up killing him. I knew that from the beginning. So it was like, nice to meet you. I'm sorry for when I'm going to murder you. And like Peter and I would joke about it all the time. Like, oh, it's so fun. It's going to end so horribly, but right now it's great. But I thought it was really interesting how it was drawn out. Like, to me, I think there were moments where Peter and I both wanted it to be more of like a love affair. Like we wanted to really, really feel like a connection, because a lot of it was like playing mini golf and jumping in the thing, you know, and we were like, what if it was like truly like they had really connected? And then for me, I felt like it would be such a heartbreak to murder that person. But the writers are really smart, and they wanted it to be more like up in the air in terms of like, who is he? They didn't want people to invest 100% in the love affair and just be like along for the ride with that. They wanted there to be questions the whole time. They wanted people to be like, hang on, that's a bit weird. What are they doing? You know, and they also wanted people to be rooting for Shauna and Jeff. So they're just always right. Like, you know, if that's one thing I learned over the course of the season, when I was like, excuse me, you know, they're always right. So I'm grateful that they had all those question marks and kept the two characters at a little bit of a distance, because the audience was just like, you know, going crazy for that storyline and making up all kinds of insane things that they thought could be possible.
Yeah, I was curious, have you read into some of those theories? Like, are you into that kind of thing, what the fans are responding to?
Initially, I did. Initially, I was going on Reddit and reading everything because I was so interested. Like at the end of the night when my child was finally in bed, I'd just be like, oh, let me look. But I would always see like something mean about myself. And then I was like, you know, you have to be ready to like see everything. And I don't know. I just was like, this is such a fun time and such a great experience. And so why be putting this in my head of what people think about like what I look like or whatever. So I just stopped. I just cut it off. But for a time, it was really fun to read all the theories.
Well, moving over to Candy, based on a true story, very gruesome story from the 80s, where this woman, Candy Montgomery, was accused of murdering Betty Gore with an axe. What I found interesting actually about this show is that it could have gone sort of the easy route and just showed Candy as just, you know, a monster and Betty as this kind of like helpless sort of victim, but there's a lot more nuance. And you know, Betty, your character, isn't necessarily like a saint, you know. So was there something to that approach to the story that made you want to be a part of it?
Oh, absolutely. And I think it's a very pertinent subject matter right now. Like, who do we decide are okay victims? Like, who are the people who we choose to say, to believe, and to say like, oh, she deserved better, you know, she's this tragic victim. Like the whole way through the trial, Betty was also on trial, and that happens a lot to victims of violent crime. You know, they get put on trial too. What were you wearing? What did you say? And there was a lot of like victim blaming. Person after person got on the stand and said she was weird, she was awkward, I didn't really like her. And so Candy was able to tell, by virtue of being alive and beloved, was able to tell whatever story she wanted to tell. And ultimately people believed her. And that was so intense to me. I just was like, God, I don't feel like this woman got justice. She was kind of awkward. She had a hard time making friends. She was from a very small town in Kansas, and she moved to Texas, and the women are very outgoing and different. And I related to that very deeply. Like, that was something that was hard for me when I moved to Los Angeles. I was like, wait a minute, what? How am I supposed to be? I just didn't fit in. And so that aspect of the story really like broke my heart, and it's just still happening today. People are like, well, I don't like her, so she's not a victim that I can get behind. It really bums me out.
Mm. Yeah, well, just like on Yellowjackets, you're working with some very talented people here, including Jessica Biel playing Candy, and she's bringing such a specific energy to that role. Can you talk about maybe just developing the relationship there, the very twisted kind of relationship that your characters have, and what it was like to just play off of that energy that she was bringing?
Yeah, I know. I'm happy that you mentioned that because it's so interesting to me what she's doing. I'm such a fan of Jess. I have been since Texas Chainsaw Massacre, honestly, because I was like, she's amazing when I saw
Yeah.
that movie. And then The Sinner, so many things she's done. So I was very, very excited to work with her. And she just like, it was such an incredible, like tricky balance that she maintained throughout the whole performance of being a number of different things at once, like kind of unhinged, kind of present, kind of not present, like a little bit too much. But like it's really, there's so many layers to that performance. I don't watch anything I'm in more than once because it drives me crazy having to see myself, but I kind of want to watch it again just so I can see her. Because the first time I just was astonished at every moment. I just was like, oh my God. She's just, and then, we kept saying, like, I wish we had more. I wish we had more because we only really had a few scenes together. But we really grew to love each other. And I mean, if anyone wants to write us something else to do together,
I'd love that. Oh my
yeah.
God. Yeah.
It was like, let's just do a romantic comedy where we can be in love with each other. And I was like,
Yeah,
that sounds
something
great.
something lighter next time.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it's actually really interesting to just look at these two shows and these storylines even side by side, because there are these kind of commonalities, like, playing a housewife.
Mhm.
There's a darkness that's inherent in both of these stories. There's an affair, there's murder, uh, but there's obviously differences too. But I was just wondering if you could speak to maybe the experience of playing Shauna versus playing Betty, and how you sort of carry the weight of what each of them is sort of dealing with in their life.
I love all of your questions.
Thank you.
I it's so good. Yeah, there are like common themes. And I think part of that is like, you know, I think I look kind of ordinary. Like I think I look like a woman you would kind of underestimate. And I think that's an interesting way to kind of hide a lot of like rage and trauma and surprising things that come out. Um, the difference is, I guess I would say, like Shauna's much more fun because she's so confident and she's funny and just on top of it. And that's more fun to go to work and do. Sometimes it's harder for me because I'm not confident 100% of the time. So it can be hard for me to like go into a scenario where I'm playing someone who's not really doubting myself and be comfortable physically. But also that was great for me. It built my confidence, my own confidence a lot. And Betty, she's struggling with postpartum depression. She's kind of like sinking in on herself. She feels hopeless. She feels desperate. Nobody's listening to her. And, it was a harder space to be in emotionally, but also easier in some ways because I tend towards that type of feeling more than I tend towards like snappy, kind of confident energy. But it was fun to go from one to the other. It felt like getting a lot of different things out of my system.
Well, do want to just congratulate you again on these two excellent performances
Thank
that are
you.
very different from each other. Um, Truly, just the variety that you provide is just kind of astonishing. So,
Thank you.
for those of you watching, subscribe for more interviews and go to goldderby.com to make your Emmy predictions. Thank you so much, Melanie. This was great.
Thank you. I'm going to go watch your interviews with Christina and Tony and Juliet.
Yeah, they're a lot of fun.